Hello and welcome to the Brothers Talk, people of the world. We are on the Brothers Talk show on M24 News with your hosts, Rod, Scott, and Norm, where our purpose continues to be a simple one. We're three Black, unfiltered African-American men with no strings attached, giving voice as the most feared, most misunderstood, and most rarely heard from segment of the population on topics of interest to us for education, enlightenment, and entertainment. Remember, you can reach us with your comments, questions, and suggestions. We're at The Brothers Talk on Twitter, The Brothers Talk on Instagram, the Facebook group with the same name. And if you care to share in more detail, hit us up at the email address, thebrotherstalk@gmail.com. Also, tune into our weekly podcast, which drops each Friday wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. In our news segment, we have to talk about the travesty that is the justification for the killing of Andrew Brown Jr. in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. The prosecutor came out today and gave his okay, effectively, to the murder of Andrew Brown Jr. by saying that these cops were justified because Andrew Brown effectively pulled his car away from the cop's hand, which is what I guess they are trying to determine, his actually having hit one of the cops with the car. And then they also tried to justify that during the encounter that they fired a bullet through the front window, but they spent most of their time actually demeaning his character, talking so much about his previous arrests and encounters with the law enforcement system. But the real problem is that none of that had anything to do with the fact that he was gunned down as they came in on the back of a flatbed or pickup truck, looking like a Klan rally. And so they effectively came in and said that they didn't see anything more than a mobile phone in his hand that he threw down when he attempted to escape. And all of the video shows that that's what he was attempting to do. And even the district attorney himself had the gall to say that it looked like he was trying to get away, and yet he's dead. And the district attorney is saying that was justifiable force.
You know, Rod, just the brief few seconds that they showed the public of the video so far, you're right. They rode in on this truck on the back of the truck like they were going to a lynching for a Klan rally. I mean, and actually, it was an execution. So they go in there and they execute this guy, execute Brown. And what I'm saying, and I'm wondering what the rest of the country and the rest of the world are thinking when Black people are, we're doing everything. We're begging, we're pleading, we're singing Kumbaya, we're holding vigils. The clergy, they're begging and pleading, please stop killing Black folks. White cops, please stop it. What do we have to do to stop these guys from killing? It's like we're animals and we don't care. Black lives do not matter for the slogan Black Lives Matter. According to them, it doesn't, because they're constantly killing Black men.
Well, Scott, they've been killing us since we landed on this continent. This is nothing new. I mean, we're dealing with the people who are just morally bankrupt, which Dr. King, I think, would testify to. And they have no moral compass. So yes, they are killing us, but this is what they've done and what they continue to do. It's not going to stop. This is where we are, white America.
And so, as we have said many times, there is no counterbalance. It's just like the meme that says, we're not asking you to shoot them like you shoot us. We're asking you to not shoot us like you don't shoot them. And so over and over again, what we see on so many different situations is this act of questioning compliance. And yet you have so many other examples where you have white people who are way more resistant and who do things like actually pull guns on cops, and yet they live to tell the story. And over again, you got instances of unarmed people with color who continue to get gunned down out here. So it's time for them to really go through the serious process of saying that they really need to examine and overhaul the entire policing system, because it does have its DNA in slave patrols, which were all about recapturing and controlling our ancestors. And so we need to have a situation where we don't have to have all of our people constantly on alert because there doesn't seem to be anything that any of us can do to keep from being killed by these racist cops. And just like when we had our other segment where we asked the question, where are the good cops? Because there's no way you're supposed to be a trained observer of illegal activity and you're sitting next to these people who are, let's face it, just cold-blooded killers. But that is obviously the system under which they are acting. And so to have this prosecutor who's elected by the local government stand there and act in judgment of people who he needs to help him make his cases is just not something that anybody should ever believe is going to be a fair system. So we're calling it out, and we hope that there are more protests that will lead to a reimagining of police. So please stay tuned with us. We'll be back in a moment with more on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. In our politics segment this week, we noticed that one of the things that is a part of the new police reform, so-called bipartisan effort, which is certainly suspect because the Republican bipartisan champion is Tim Scott. But Tim Scott hails from South Carolina, along with James Clyburn, who is the number 3 guy in the Democratic Party. And one of the things that disturbed us recently is that in these conversations, which are always about some form of compromise, but James Clyburn said that he is willing to walk back the language of removing qualified immunity. And that should be a non-starter, because the real problem, we have these issues like what happened with Andrew Brown Jr., what happened with Breonna Taylor, what happened with all kinds of other shootings across the country, is that there is no deterrent to these cops because they never face any of the consequences. There's an old saying that came out of a writer in Minnesota that said that as long as we have black skin, then we're never truly unarmed. And so the converse of that is that you're always going to have cops who are going to be claiming they're fearing for their lives anytime they come into contact with one of us who has that black skin, which makes them afraid for their lives. And so this is a real big problem. And we think that Clyburn needs to be called on the carpet for it, but which exemplifies a bigger problem for us, which is just simply saying that we need younger voices in government. We have too many people who are significantly over the retirement age. The retirement age says you can't even be a post office delivery person over the age of 65, but we routinely have 80 and 81, 82, 83, plus 75 people in responsible positions of government, and it's time for some new voices.
You know, Rod, if Clyburn is saying that he's gonna back away from qualified immunity, I mean, well, what do you have? Because that's what the problem is. They have qualified immunity. You can't touch them. You can't do anything. You can't hold them accountable. And so the question to me with Clyburn, and you know, I don't have any facts to back this up, but it seems to me if you follow the money, you might find some extra money laying around in one of his PACs or something like that, because, you know, there's always been rumors that he's one of those guys who want to, you know, make deals, and making deals usually come in the form of exchanging money. And that appears to be one of the things that's happened here. The other thing that you mentioned is when we start talking about leadership, we got so many people in the Democratic Party who are, like you said, 80 plus, and they're not even grooming any younger folks to take leadership positions. That's what happened during the Obama administration. Everything was about Barack Obama. They were not grooming new leaders in the Democratic Party. Like the Republicans do, they have the young Republicans on all these college universities. We don't have it. I don't know if the Democrats are having something like that. Maybe they have it now. But the bigger issue here is you have people who are out of touch, partly because of their age.
Well, Clyburn is just another handkerchief head representative of the CBC. And really, their goal is to basically maintain the status quo. So they don't really want to change anything. They're just black faces keeping the white liberals happy. They're not there for us. They've never been there for us. And what this is just another example. During the election, the presidential election, Clyburn was against the defunding of the police, which he stated that cost them seats. No, not going after your demographic cost you seats, not representing black people and brown people and the people of this country is what's costing you seats. He's just a sellout, and that's what you can expect from him.
So you're absolutely right. One of the things that happened is that he obviously threw his support behind Joe Biden and really resurrected his campaign because Biden was effectively dead in the water until he got to South Carolina. Now, obviously, Bernie Sanders made his own errors in terms of not having the kind of black representation that he would have needed if he wanted to continue to run strongly in South Carolina. But the bottom line is Biden won. Biden knows he owes his political life to James Clyburn. And yet we don't see Clyburn calling any of those chips in. And so I'm just of a mind to just believe that there's a point where your faculties just aren't what they are anymore. I mean, there's got to be a reason why people look at 65 as the mandatory retirement age, and then some is even 62, and that you can't be in any of those functions, but somehow there isn't any mandatory retirement age. Strom Thurmond died in office at 100 years old. And it looks like this is what people like Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and Clyburn and company are doing. And as you said, Scott, there are some younger folks out there who are on the horizon, but what do they do to them? They effectively push them back down into the mix and ignore them like they're children. And so it's just one more instance of why we really need to be about trying to get some new, fresh voices in there. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment with more of the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our sports segment this week, we saw an interesting debate taking place on some program called Crossfire, in which Van Jones was interacting with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the same Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that we saw named for the Social Justice Award in the NBA. And the topic was, should athletes, college athletes, be paid? And so they brought up some really interesting statistics that said that based on the amount of money that is generated by the athletes in the two major college sports, which are football and basketball, that the NCAA tournament generates almost $1 billion on the NCAA tournament for colleges alone, thereby saying that the average value of an NCAA basketball player is $265,000. And that for a football player, it's $120,000. And yet these athletes never get any of that money. They sometimes now get like small stipends, but it is nowhere near what their value is in this process. And so in this debate of sorts, Van Jones was against it using the stereotypical white line of if they're getting free education and it should be more important for them to get education. But Kareem was on the other side as one who has actually been there and knows what actually happens to these athletes, where they are literally working for the college. Let them miss a practice or miss a team meal and miss a team meeting and see aren't there consequences. These are kids who are basically being exploited to the degree that even in the midst of a pandemic, when there were no other students basically allowed on campus, these athletes were being forced to play sports or in danger losing their scholarships so that the NCAA could continue to make money. So this is just the latest in a long line of travesties where NCAA President Mark Emmert makes $2.7 million a year, nearly $3 million a year for what is his main job besides negotiating these television contracts is basically to keep these athletes from getting the money that they are due as the unpaid labor for the National Collegiate Athletic Association.
You know, I get sick of guys like Van Jones who didn't play, who wasn't a college scholarship athlete, and he's coming on here with this opinion that these guys basically should be working for free, because that's what they're doing. The reason I'm saying that is, you know, they're always throwing out the fact that they're getting this free college education, but what about other students who get scholarships? They're not held by the same rules as student athletes. If you get a chemistry scholarship, you can go get you a part-time job someplace at some lab with some company, and you're not going to lose your scholarship for it. You know, if you're in the band, if you get a band scholarship, you can go work part-time. Somebody can buy you a meal, and you're not going to get punished for it. The only athletes, the only students on scholarship who get punished for getting anything other than the scholarship are the paying sports, basketball and football. Anybody on soccer, nobody cares whether somebody give you a ride home. You know, you're on the swim team, oh, you can go spend the night with whoever you want to spend the night with. Nobody cares. The problem here is you have these people generating billions of dollars, and it's like slave labor. They're not being compensated under the guise of amateur athletics. It's wrong, and it needs to change.
Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen. Do these athletes own their names and likeness?
They do not.
Nope.
So that's slavery 101, because they can't even sign an autograph. They can't sell a jersey with their name on it. They can't take pictures with fans for money. So they really are slaves. They've sold their souls to get a piece of paper, which basically what, 25% of them might get? This is simply slavery.
And so that's a really good point, because you had an athlete who was at the University of Minnesota, and I believe he was a wrestler. And so what he had actually done in his spare time was that he made his own little hip hop rap records. And so he actually did one of those and sold it on iTunes. So notice I said, like, he's a wrestler. So he sold his records on iTunes and unfortunately sold them under his own name and lost his scholarship. So this is the kind of thing that you have happening. You've had other athletes, like I believe it was Terrell Pryor at Ohio State, who was kicked off of the team before his senior year because he had the nerve to sell his championship jersey to raise money to buy Christmas presents for his family. And so once that was found out, he again lost his opportunity to continue to play. And so these are the kind of punitive actions being taken by, as I repeat, a guy who makes $2.7 million a year, doesn't dribble a ball, doesn't catch a pass, doesn't even coach a team. So what is his real role besides negotiating these contracts? Then it must be really to keep the other athletes from getting any of this restitution. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment again with more of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. Representatives, even though they have zero credibility with the Black community. Van Jones in particular is one of those who tries to butter his bread on both sides, whether he's having these meetings with Jared and Ivanka Kushner, or whether he's being represented by Jay-Z and Rock Nation. He's just a litany of these folks like Jay-Z and like Snoop Dogg and like Lil Wayne, who are constantly being thrust out there as some kind of de facto representatives of the Black community. And we don't really get it because there's nothing that he represents. There's nothing that we actually see that any Black people that we know actually hold Van Jones to any kind of standard as representing our community.
You know, Rod, you hit the nail on the head, because CNN constantly trot him out there. Every time there's an issue dealing with anything pertaining to race that relate to Black folks, when Black people are involved, they bring Van Jones out there as if he represents Black people. He's a spokesperson for Black people. And nothing can be farther from the truth. Here's a guy who is partying with, I've seen pictures of him partying with Ivanka, Jared, and Don Jr., and Eric Trump laughing and grinning. I saw one picture where he was like in the middle and they would had him surrounded and they was dancing. And then the next night he goes on CNN and want to cry and talk like he's fighting for black rights and it's like everything black folks. I'm all about being black, but the people who are oppressing black folks, when he's not on camera, he's out there grinning and smiling with them. And you mentioned Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg, all of a sudden, here this guy is on these commercials with smoking jackets on the beach, that kind of thing. This was supposed to be a hardcore gangbanger. And now all of a sudden, he's on TV in all of these commercials and shows. Who's he representing? Who's he speaking to? He's not representing the people where he grew up. And they're just using these guys. They know they're being used, but it's all about the money.
Well, since you spoke on Snoop, I just like to follow up. When he spoke out against Gayle King, he tried to go street. He tried to be, Compton or Long Beach or whatever. But basically, the corporate establishment shut him down and showed him for the slave that he is. He apologized. My mother told me to, and went right along getting his head rubbed. Now, for Van, he simply trotted out there by the white establishment to attract the white liberals. Black people, we know what he is. That's obvious. Nobody's following him. Nobody's tuning in for him. But the white liberals will. They will follow him and believe every word he says in regards to race. He makes them feel comfortable. And that's all there is.
And so that's why it was so good when Sonny Hostin decided to call him out to his face. And I love that interview where she basically said he was like a chameleon, that he was basically black when it was convenient, and that she had the examples of using his tweets where he tried to defend 45 as to the things that he claimed that he had done for black people. And then in the very next instance, he's crying on TV talking about how since Biden is elected, that means his daughter can grow up in a place where character matters. Well, it's interesting that you would talk about character matters because it doesn't seem like he has any.
No, not at all. Not only does he not have any character, but these guys have sold their soul to the devil. These are people, sometimes they'll talk about religion and you see some of these same guys looking up to the sky, like they worship God. But I was raised in the church, and I haven't seen anybody that was raised in the church sell their souls like these guys are selling their souls. And they think they're fooling people, but they're not. We all see through that. Nobody support what they're doing. Not black folks don't support it. Not real black people support that, what they're doing anyway.
Well, there was a Van Jones on every plantation. And when the uprising came, he was usually the first ones the brothers and sisters went after.
So that just shows you that when you look at these guys, they don't seem to, as you say, Scott, they've sold themselves out and they are there for the quick buck. And while they might be artists that people will buy their music, that certainly does not qualify them by any stretch of the imagination to speak for the larger Black community. And so we need to make sure that's known. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment with more of the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. And in our education segment this week, we wanted to highlight some information that we saw in an article recently in The Atlantic that talked about the fact that there is a serious gap where there were literally no Black people earning PhDs in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so a big part of this problem, obviously, is the fact that from the study that they cited shows that from 2002 to 2017, less than 6% of the PhDs earned were by Black people. And so that represents effectively 15 years where not only were you not having PhDs who could then be hired as professors, where they could become sponsors, where they could become mentors, where they could become advisors, and really also encourage other students to pursue the PhD. So you have a situation where it's like the self-fulfilling prophecy that as long as the number stays at like 5.4%, then you're not having enough people inside the system who can actually become shepherds of others who will actually have the opportunity to pursue these kinds of degrees.
You know, Rod, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's the biggest problem. It's Black people not having advocates in universities where you have professors who are African American. One of the other issues is it's not like they're not applying, they're not trying to get, they're doing the academic work, but once they get to the dissertation level and you don't have African American Black professors who dare to be your dissertation advisor, more than likely it's going to be a non-Black professor. And I can't prove it, but I don't think they want to see that many more African American PhDs out there. So the kind of help that they're not getting the kind of advocacy that they need. The other thing is, cost. It costs a lot to go to grad school.
You're right, Scott. It does cost a lot. And just by going to grad school or getting a PhD, are they ever going to make that money back? You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and becoming a professor. Now, I don't know what the salaries are for being a college professor, but how does that work out for them? And I think the advocacy for the students have to start in high school, junior high school. You have to prepare them, because who wants to go to school for another, 7 years after you graduate?
And so you both talked about the cost. And so another thing that this article in the Atlantic cited was that 50% of the current crop of Black PhD candidates are at for-profit colleges, and that the average loan was over $120,000. So it does really show that, it makes it really prohibitive for students who are probably still under the debt load from their undergraduate. And a lot of these colleges where you pursue a PhD means you also have to have gotten your master's first. So they're already under crushing debt. And so suddenly they're hit with another loan of $120,000 plus. And so that is just unconscionable. And so you couple that with the fact that they are not receiving the kind of advocacy and support that they need to stay on that pathway. And it's something that really does need to be addressed. And so that gives us an opportunity to plug another Facebook group that we started recently called Black Parent University. So if you are out there and you have information and you want to support the idea of how more of our young Black students can get to the PhD level so that we can eradicate some of this gap, please go out there and support that group.
You're right, Rod. The number one thing I think is the advocacy part of it. You have, when I worked at CDC, there were 5 students who were getting PhDs, and they were at Howard University. And they didn't have the resources at Howard. They was using the data set, CDC data set, and I was running programs for them. Neither one of those students knew SAS. And I asked them, how did you get through an undergraduate program, your graduate program, without knowing how to analyze data? And they were saying, well, I know the methods part of it, but I don't know this part because we don't have the resources. We don't have SAS. We don't have anybody at Howard who could teach us this. So they was coming to my office. I was doing it free. It was like 5 of them. I helped them with their dissertation. That's another part of it when you go talk about HBCUs, the lack of resources.
And, I just had an idea with that story, Scott. Why don't the HBCUs come together and work on joint PhD programs for African-American students? They could share resources and do whatever it takes to bring up the numbers in regards to our level of PhD participation.
That's a great idea, Norm. So we put it out there. HBCUs, please get on board. We'll be back in a moment again for the Brothers Talk on M24 News. So please stay tuned. And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our relationship segment this week, we want to talk about a myth that has been out there for over 50 years about the absentee Black father. I mean, it's so pervasive that you even had former President Barack Obama launch this Brothers Keeper initiative, which was supposed to address this myth. And so, first of all, there's information that comes from the CDC that talks about the fact that you one, can't equate the number of quote unquote fatherless children because of the marriage rates that are out there, but which they often use to talk about the number of divorced households or single parent households. And really, the truth is the majority of Black fathers, 2.5 million out of 4.2 million, do live with their kids. That's over half. And even if they're not married to their partner, they still do live with their kids. And the second thing in the same CDC report, which said that Black dads, whether they live with their children or not, are more actively involved in their children's lives than their counterparts of any other ethnic group. You know, CDC reports that Black fathers who live with their children are more likely than fathers of other ethnic groups to provide physical care. That means bathing, diapering, feeding for their young children, to read to their children, to help their children with their homework, all on a daily basis, than fathers of other ethnic groups who also live with their kids. You know, and so we have a report that says that even when the fathers don't live with their children, Black fathers are more likely to be involved in the care, including that same reading and helping with homeworks, taking them to school and so forth, than other ethnic groups. And so it's a myth that's out there. And so we think it's high time that it be retired because it is one of the most tired and simply lazy efforts of racist stereotypes that exist out there.
You know, there's one or two things happening here. One, with that myth, they keep that myth going. One is the people who are writing these reports, you know, saying that Black men are not present in their, or active or present in their kids' lives. Either it's the circle of people they're hanging with, or I think it's more than likely this is an effort to minimize anything that Black males do when it comes to their family and their children. This is another way to demonize Black men. This is another Black guy for Black men. Let's just say that they don't care about their family. They're not present. You know, I think it's more of that than this whole thing of whoever is writing that report. Like I said, it's based on the company that you're keeping.
Yeah, I'm with you, Scott. This is just another example of how the white power structure wants to dehumanize Black men. Basically, we have no ties to family. We're just sex addicts or what have you, and we just gonna have children and not take care of them, and we have no moral compass, when we all know that's not true. And basically that's what they do in this country. They do that for Black victims of police brutality. They do that for everything. Again, this is just another attack on our Blackness.
And so we have this kind of ongoing stereotyping that becomes so prevalent in white society that, you know, they feel the need to feel pity and try to find ways, you know, that they think that we're not there. And it's a part of what I call this intentional dissonance contract, where they see the examples all around them. It's like, you know, they see that we are there with our kids and they want to ignore it as though somehow we're invisible. It's like, no, you have ample evidence around you, and we're not so-called dinosaurs that you don't see enough of us. It's evident everywhere. and yet you still find people who want to use that myth because somehow it supports their racist stereotype.
You know, it's exactly right. You know, it's an attack on black men character. You know, it's disgusting because they want to use that as a reason that some of these kids are out there. Anytime there's a black kid that's having some problems or in trouble of any kind, they're going to say, they always say, oh, well, there's not a father in the home. You know, he doesn't know his father. He doesn't even know who his, you know, he doesn't even know who his dad is. So this is another way to just attack the character of black men. And it's just sickening. And it's time out for that nonsense because so much evidence. I don't know any black men who don't spend time with their family or their kids. So, and this has been all my whole life. It's time out for this nonsense. It's a weak argument. There's too much evidence against it, but yet and still people are still printing it.
Look no further than the sitcoms on television with black families. They're constantly trying to eliminate the black father. And most of the time they have by introducing the black kids living with a white family.
So it is just a part of that, as we call it, the mythology. And we know that mythology is often supported in the media. And so we want to be not only the debunkers of that myth, but we want to start to make sure that they are aware that we're watching. So please stay tuned with us. We'll be right back with our final segment on Black Love on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News in our Black on Black Love segment this week. Scott, you got an interesting topic.
Yeah, the topic today for Black on Black Love is that Delaware State University is canceling the student debt for over $700,000 for recent graduates of Delaware State. And I think that there is setting an example that other universities and HBCUs should do the same.
Yeah, you know, there was a big story last year about that hedge fund billionaire who canceled the debt for that entire graduating class from Morehouse. And so with the number of billionaires that are out there and with the overwhelming amount of debt these kids are under, it would be great to see more individuals, more colleges, more banks even decide that as a part of their wokeness in particular, that they would look at the crushing debt that a lot of these Black kids are under and find ways to forgive that so that they can at least start off their careers on a level footing where they're not being hampered by this money, which you cannot get out from under, that is the only debt which the federal government will not allow there to be any sort of relief. So if you die, that money's still owed.
Yes, it would be a nice thing for the federal government to eliminate the debt of the students, and that would give them an opportunity to buy homes and start a life and invest.
So we hope that this will be something that we'll see more stories of. So we think that is a great example of an HBCU showing some real Black on Black love. And so we applaud Delaware State for the kind of work that you're doing. We don't know how you managed to pull it off, but please share that as well with the other HBCUs out there, because we don't need our kids continuing to struggle with that kind of debt. So that's it for another edition of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. We thank you for your time. Remember, as always, you can reach us at the Brothers Talk on Twitter, the Brothers Talk on Instagram, and the Facebook group of the same name. Remember, we mentioned Black Parent University, which is where we're trying to pull together educators and parent guardians to help navigate the failing education system that we hope the Biden administration will do a better job of, but until they do, we've got to do our part. And finally, always look out for our weekly podcast, which drops each Friday, wherever you hear your favorite podcast. And I said finally, but one final note is you can always reach us at the Brothers Talk at gmail.com if you have any other comments, suggestions, show ideas, etc. So thanks again. And remember, let's do better today, because that's all we really have. See you next time.